The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot
Your stories don't
see.
define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. Listeners, you're in for a treat again today because you get to hear some stories, the background stories of an author who wrote a book recently called A Dog Named Beautiful. And one of my dear friends, Vince Moffat, sent that book to me as a gift. And I have to say, when I saw it come in the mail, I didn't know it was from him. I couldn't remember having a conversation with him, but I got this book in the mail. And on the caption or on the front cover, it says, "For fans of Marley and Me." And if anyone knows that book, you know that I immediately put that book down and had no intention of reading it until I found out exactly who gave it to me, because I knew it was going to make me cry. So I put the book down. I didn't read it. It was on my bedside table until I heard from Vince. And he said, "Did you ever read my friend's book that I sent to you?" And I thought, oh, great. Now I have to read the book, which I did in a weekend. And I am a slow reader. I process things slowly. And so I like to read slowly so I can get the full feeling and emotion and value out of a book. And I remember getting up on Saturday morning before my husband, and I sat on our little couch in the bay window with the sun coming in. I had my cup of tea with me, and I cried for about an hour. And then I got myself together, and I got almost probably about halfway through the book and finished it the next morning in the same position. And I have to tell you, listeners, the rest of the book didn't make me cry. It made me feel hopeful. It made me want to meet this man. And it made me want to hold my brother closely in the tightest, warmest hug I could possibly give him. So listeners, I'd love to introduce you to my new friend, Rob Kugler. Rob, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's an honor, but you didn't give me a warning that you were going to make me cry. It's really nice to hear just how the book is still having an impact on people, and it sounds like that it meant something to you. So that means a lot to me to hear.
It did, and thank you. And for our listeners, I think the reason I didn't cry at the ending or the diagnosis of the dog was because we lost my hiking companion, Toby, my giant chocolate lab, last summer. So in July. And I think I was still grieving in such a significant way that somebody else's loss felt like it paled in comparison.
Mm-hmm.
So, but now, and as you say, it did have an impact on me. We recently adopted another dog, and it happens to be a yellow lab. So it did have enough of an impact that I was ready to have another fur baby in my house after reading that book. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And there's no, like, so many dogs have just the pureness of love, but I feel like there's still like no love like lab love.
I would agree with that. I've had lots of other kinds of dogs, and yeah, it's different. So for our listeners, Rob, I always love to start the conversation by asking the guest to share something about themselves that most people might not know about you. And I know that book opened up a whole lot about you that most people wouldn't have known.
Mm-hmm.
But what's something maybe from your childhood or maybe in the last couple of years that people might not know about you at this point?
One of the things I was thinking this has been a while, but just like the variance of jobs that I've had, perhaps like, I've taught preschool, and I've, been like doorman at the bar or work security. But I've also, done a lot of volunteer work, but then also I was a, corrections officer at a maximum security prison for a little stint, before deploying to to Iraq, and so just I think that little bit, sometimes there's just I've got a decent breadth of experience, also been a garbage man. So there's some things that I feel like that is, I don't know, maybe not everyone knows how many different roles that I've played.
Well, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate it because I think sometimes we get this one-dimensional view of somebody based on one thing that we know about them or a handful of things that we know about them. And knowing that you've had all these different jobs, I mean, the whole preschool teacher thing, it's like, boy, if you can do that, you can do anything. No wonder you could be a Marine.
Yeah. That's I joke sometimes that it wasn't that much different, managing 3 and 5 year olds versus managing a platoon of Marines. But and one thing that's kind of interesting too because I don't know if it really got in there, and that it's kind of touched in the book, but when I was back home, I found a journal that I had to write in for my freshman year in high school. And there was a few entries that I was kind of like looking back at myself and be like, man, you could have got something good there if you actually would have not scribbled everything down in the 5 minutes before class started, and then, but another one was like how this lifelong dream that I had, like to want to be an actor, that was, clear back, even then. And because we touch on it in the book, but I was able to pursue that. And then, I booked my first audition in LA, and it would end up being for the PSA for the VA, Veterans Affairs. And I went to the Groundlings Improv School and was doing well there. And so like that whole thing was real. And then like coming back to it and seeing that as like seeing it in my journal as a freshman in high school in a town of 3,800 people, to where when I said that that's what I wanted to do, my teachers were like, well, let's be honest. Let's try to focus on something that could be real, and so because I was still doing well there, but I left. And I talk about that in the book,
right.
The decision to leave. But there's still sometimes where I don't know, it hurts, like when, like my dad will be like, hey, are you sad that you never made it as far in LA as you thought you might? And I was like, I was doing better than I ever thought that I could. And then I left. I chose to leave.
Right.
So it's like some people see from the outside that I went and failed. And then that, you know what I mean? Like that part.
Right. But you didn't fail.
I didn't. No,
it was your choice. And yeah. I think that's so important. I was just talking to somebody. First of all, the first thing that popped into my head was that sometimes spite is a really great, powerful motivator. And having a teacher or teachers or adults or even friends say, oh, that'll never happen.
Right.
It's kind of, for a teenager, it's like, that is the best fuel you can possibly give them.
Yeah, it really can be. That's something I've actually wanted to try to dig out too, is even just like anger. Like nothing, I don't have any more energy in the world than when I'm angry. It's like, so then where if that energy exists, how can I extract that? And when I'm not angry, because I don't, because then when I'm angry.
Right. And that's not fun at all. But no. I think that's a really good point. And just back to this whole idea of spite being a motivator, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think anger is really important as a motivator because it makes you look in the mirror in a way you wouldn't otherwise.
Right.
And
yes.
I read a book when I first took on my first sales role many years ago, and it was called Why Women Make the Best Salesmen. And it was a woman who owned a whole bunch of car dealerships, love car dealerships across Texas. And she was the author. And one of the two things stuck with me after reading it. One was that she always had a mirror behind her desk in her office, because if somebody walks in angry and they see themselves, no one wants to look like that.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so brilliant. So, and I happen to have a mirror behind my desk when I worked as a salesperson. So it was kind of cool. The other thing she said is that she always kept candy or something on her desk so that people would feel hosted. Okay, and I had at that point already had a big tub of Twizzlers on my desk and a bowl full of those little clementine oranges.
Oh, nice.
And I did notice that people felt hosted, even if they didn't eat anything, they noticed that it was there. But she talked about that spite being a motivator as well. And then the other thing that popped into my head is when people see something as a failure and how you share the story differently for them. Mm-hmm. That the only way we can do that is if we know that that's how they saw it.
Right.
So your dad actually asked you, do you feel like you failed there? Do you regret giving up?
Yes.
And that gave you the opportunity to say, I didn't give up. I chose to leave. And those are really different things. And it comes back to how you tell your story, right?
Right. And that's the thing. I'm still learning on how to tell my story, and times where I've been a guest on other podcasts and trying to learn to share things, shorter, like more of an elevator pitch. Because sometimes when I get into it, I want you to know all the details. Like, you've got to understand every aspect so you can fully appreciate this. And then it's like, okay, well, now we're out of time and you're about a quarter away into your stuff.
Oh my gosh. That is the story of my father's stories. And there would be a point where he would get into all the names of the characters in his story. And I'm like, Dad, I'm never going to meet these people. Can we move on? Right. Just tell me his nephew. And that's enough for me. Right. So I get that. And you are not alone in that difficulty of understanding which details to share and which ones don't matter.
Right.
And I thought you did a brilliant job of that in your book. And granted, that's where really good editors make it like the best book it could be, because most of us feel like we need to give a ton more context. And the editor's like, your goal is for people to read this and feel this way or experience A. And adding this detail is not going to contribute to that experience.
Right. And it's so great to have that editor just for anybody, to have a party that's not personally, emotionally attached to the story, that then can see that. It's easier to see that when you're not attached to it. Exactly. It's like, this detail, you might feel like it's important, but it's just a, like a red herring almost, it's just a thing we don't need to chase.
Exactly. So when you think about your first experience with an editor, my first experience with a really good editor, I had one of my friends describes it as your first shitty book.
Yeah.
And I had one of those. And I gave it to a friend that happens to be a great editor. And when it came back to me, it was covered in red. And I was so intimidated by that and discouraged by it that I put it aside. And she was like, no, don't. It's good. There's so much in here that's good. And I just thought, this is my shitty first book, and I'm going to set it aside and I'm going to work on book number 2. And so you notice how I gave you this little snapshot instead of all the context.
Yes.
So tell me, and you don't have to do that. I'm interested in all the aspects of your story.
Yeah, sure.
Tell me about your first experience with an editor. And because I know a lot of listeners have written a book, or they're interested in writing a book, or they have a memoir in them somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of, it's a little bit interesting. So I had a collaborative writer as well, and his name is Marcus Brotherton, and he's written several best-selling books. And when I wanted to work with him, originally I was put in touch with 4 different collaborative writers as potential through my agent at CAA. Kate Hoyt is her name, and she's amazing. But she represents very, very big talent. So there's times to where, I love her, she's amazing, but then also it's hard for me to get in and get a line, when she's like Lady Gaga and people like, you know what I mean? Like that's literally who she's, going. And a
little intimidating too.
Yeah. But so when we got I had four collaborative writers to choose from, and Marcus's work with the entire ensemble is not the right word, but it's like, I don't know if it was the full platoon, but all the guys from Band of Brothers. Marcus wrote a collective memoir, and then certain specific memoirs like of Shifty Powers, and a few others. And I felt like that I wanted to work with him due to his work with them, and then also like to feel closer to the Band of Brothers, because that was something that my generation of military members like watched, kind of like, it was almost like it wasn't a Bible, but it was, this weird, we watched it and we felt the camaraderie of these men, and we felt, attached to them. And so he and I worked on the book. So he almost kind of served as an editor himself. Mm-hmm. And we worked on it for a year, and we had the Flatiron was the publisher, and we had an editor that gave us the guidelines of what he wanted, but then he left like midway through to edit Joe and Jill Biden's books. And then a junior editor came in, and then this was his first position as a senior editor in this book. So then when he was like, okay, I like the second half, but I don't like the first, let's redo that. And that's kind of like, how
starting all over.
Yeah. And I was okay to do that, but Marcus had Gary Sinise's book to write. And so like time-wise, he's like, I don't have time for that. And then so got on the phone call with Kate, and she's like, hey, this is amateur hour. Like you can't just say, hey, rewrite at the beginning, So then a third editor popped over from the UK and said, well, I can do this. And then what it was, there's some good stuff there. There's some really good stuff that happened that she was able to help us with. But I think the quickest way to tell the story is to say, so that first senior editor said, stay away from Marley and me as far as you can. I want this to be like wild. This is Rob's story, and Bella is with him along his journey. And then the second editor, when he came in, he's like, well, I don't like the first part. But he didn't get to keep control of the ship after the UK editor came in and said, okay, we can do this, but what we need to do is make this book more like Marley and me. So, so that process was hard, because I would have rather have gone ahead and spent the time to rewrite the beginning. But especially because some of the end was more untouched from Marcus than me. So like, I felt like more the end was more solely mine. And then that's what they liked more. And then, it's different, I don't know if I'm selling the book very well here.
It's a good book. Don't worry about that.
and that's what I guess is, maybe that's the end of it. That's the key takeaway, is that everyone did a good job, and people have responded, pretty well to the book. It had some, like it made Forbes best travel books of the summer in 2020.
That's a pretty big deal.
That's pretty cool. Got a few good reviews, like that, like book lists and stuff like that. But I think a hard part was, for me, is that when it was getting ready to come out, or when it came out, there was a military base tour that was getting planned. And I had the lady from AFIS, which is the Armed Forces Exchange. Mm-hmm. So she was the main book buyer for AFIS nationwide. And she was like, any base that I could make it to, she would, plan a stop for. And then COVID happened.
Mm-hmm.
And some people were able to, a few other authors out there were able to market things and do well with their books through COVID. But to me, with the losing that in-person experience, kind of seemed like it just kind of fizzled all out. There was like a big buildup of the story and then the book coming out. And then, then we were stuck inside.
Well, we share that in common. My book was published May 31st, 2020. So I had not the same, because I didn't have the niche market that would have blown your book out of the water, so to speak, if you had been able to do those face-to-face things. Have you thought about doing like a reboot of it? I forget what.
Yeah, I know. I have. And, there's times where I'm like, maybe if we could do that locally, because what I ended up doing was going back to school in the meantime. I decided, hey, well, let me finish, my benefits were about to, expire, basically, military wise. And I decided to go back to school, because to me, I felt like that if I didn't use the GI Bill to its fullest extent, that was just like a waste and slap in the face to my own service and everyone else's service and sacrifices, because that's one of the biggest benefits. And I wanted to go back to school for photojournalism, and I ended up needing to use vocational rehab because my benefits didn't quite cover a full degree, just because I'd used enough to obtain my associate's degree years ago. And so I had to use vocational rehab, and then they didn't approve photojournalism because they said, we're trying to help get people jobs here.
Right.
So I was like, and then I kind of laughed at that. But anyway, I guess I agreed, and then went back to school for communications. And then within that, integrated strategic communications at WSU was, that's the degree. And I made, like magna cum laude. Hello, thank you.
Awesome.
Excited about that, especially when I'm the kid. When I think about that, it's weird. Like the child me is always present in my mind, like being like, wow, I can't believe we're doing this.
Right.
Especially the one that was like, I always joke that I remember the first time I got a C on a report card. My mom was so proud. She hung that on the refrigerator and she was like, look, he made it.
The irony of it all.
Yeah. But anyway, so people are like, okay, well, now you're going to get a job, real job with this. And there's places, opportunities there to where you can help people with marketing campaigns and all that. A whole breadth of choices from there. But I've always wanted to apply this to myself, and then, kind of really push the foundations that I started in Bella's name and my brother's name. And because we've done a few things with them, but I would like to really get back into selling my photography, talking, any speaking events, and the book, just having the title author with the book helps you get into those places, I guess.
It does. Well, and that's why I think if you go back to it, you do a second edition, you can update the cover, and you could add newer images if you wanted to, and just market it as a second edition, and then maybe get back into contact with the woman through APHIS or a woman, whoever it is that's doing it now. It's probably not the same person, but
it might not be.
I could totally see that taking off, and partly because you add an author's note about when it was published. I'm just about to do exactly that.
Okay.
I am just working on my second edition of my book.
Nice.
Just for that reason. Like, I know it's a valuable book. People who have read it have given me these amazing reviews, especially people who are writing memoir, because the book helped them identify which stories to share and how to frame them
Nice.
So it's not just the story. It's, well, in the context of what you want readers to understand or to walk away with, you have to frame it differently than you might if you're just telling the story to a friend or a
Right.
kid or whatever.
Right.
So I know it's a valuable book. I think the publishing time period just kind of got in the way. It was also right around the time of George Floyd's murder.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't feel like I was somebody whose voice needed to be amplified at that point.
Right.
So I started getting into my podcast and just meeting incredible people, especially women of color, and putting them on my podcast to amplify
Awesome.
those voices.
Right.
It wasn't my voice that needed to be amplified. So now I'm like, okay, now these same people whose voices need to be amplified can benefit by reading my book.
Oh, right.
Because then they can amplify their own voices through the stories framed in a way that makes sense for what they want to accomplish.
Right.
So yeah, how about you and I challenge each other?
Yeah. Okay.
Do the second edition and
Right.
make this work for us.
No, yeah, I know, right? Because it's again and I like the thought of a different cover too. It's funny. Some people love the cover of my book. I'm not excited about the U.S. Version. I like the Germany's was pretty on point. And it's one of my favorite pictures taken by a photography student. And Amanda Honeman, thank you, Amanda. Gave me one of the favorite pictures of Bella and I. So just that, because when you think you have an image of what your book cover might be in your head, and then you're told by people like, well, we know this is market research shows that this scheme or this color, and you're like, but does it though? Are you sure? But you know what you're doing. Okay, all right. So you know what you're doing, and anyway, so that sounds exciting, let alone the fact of just like kind of getting to get back at it, right.
And it might trigger your next book. I mean, I'm sure, because part of what I loved about your book was that you left it in a place where you could take it to another story, another aspect of the next part of your journey.
Well,
so I like that.
Okay. Because that's something that people keep on asking, like, hey, are you going to write another book? And I tell people, yes, I'd love to, but I haven't done the things that I want to do to write about yet.
Right.
And, and there's times where other people have told me like, well, what you're telling me right now, and like, tell me about the place that you're in. And like, when I get into it a little bit further, people are like, well, that's still worth writing.
Right.
Like
that. Absolutely.
So there's times to where, because I've got a lot to learn with just, a lot of things have happened since the ending of the book, especially like how it ends. A lot of it's really great. And then some of it is challenging. And, I think one of the biggest things in my opinion is just, it's easier to say some of the things that I said when it was just me and my dog in a forerunner, like that's all the responsibilities in the world, and then now it's, it's a spoiler, kids. Yeah. Family, kids, and 3 dogs, and in an area where houses are literally averaging $1.1 million. And, that's like the pressure of trying to figure out how to make enough money to own a home and provide but then still remain true to myself and not just give myself to a job that makes me miserable, but then pays more, like that whole dilemma is where I'm in at the moment. I don't have too much longer to figure it out. I don't feel like.
Well, I know for sure that I like to hear those stories because that's real life. And everyone can relate to what you're talking about right now. Anyone who will read your second book, or people who have gone through it or are going through it or will go through it. And maybe coming out on the other side is part of what you have to do in order to finish the book, that next book, because being in the middle of it isn't that inspiring. It's
not. It's
I'm going through that too.
Right.
And there's camaraderie there, but is there inspiration, motivation? But
right.
I think it's more important to know that what you're going through now is not uncommon. And that when you have a story, a particular moment in time, that even if it's a baby step out of where you are, getting a really good interview is one of those stories. Like, oh my gosh, I had such a good interview, and maybe I won't get the job, but I felt really good walking out of that.
Right.
And there's a story.
Yeah. I get that, because there's times, well, even just going back home to Nebraska is where I'm originally from. I live in the Pacific Northwest now, the Columbia River Gorge. Beautiful, beautiful place. It's amazing. But back home, the quietness and stillness, and the conversations that are able to be had when people aren't scrambling to continue to find the next thing or the next promotion, or there was a big lesson in that, to like, hey, let's also, we can't completely just kick back and relax and be like, hey, we're good, but there's still a lot of moments that we could take to appreciate how good that it really is. Because where we are is an amazing place, and even though we don't own, our rent is cheaper than anywhere else in the area, just because we've got a good relationship with our landlord. So like, there's a blessing in what we have, and the area that we live. We're 5 minutes from the White Salmon River and the Columbia, and 40 minutes from Mount Hood, 30 from Mount Adams, and 3 miles up the road we can get into logging roads, take the dogs up there, and the kids, and get onto trails to where no one is, and there's hundreds and hundreds of miles of just forest. And like, it's not a lot to complain about if you don't look at the one thing that you can't have, which is owning a home, at least in the immediate, so.
Right. I think I was just talking about this with a friend as we're building our businesses, and we both live in a place that is lower cost of living than a lot of other places, but it's still way out of range for most people, which is crazy. This little town in Montana, that it's so out of range now for most people, teachers, nurses, city and state employees can't afford to buy a house here now, which is crazy. And at the same time, our conversation was, how do you manage your life, your expectations, your work, so that you're paying more attention to the outcomes than the inputs? And what that means is, as I'm building my business, if I really think about, I could get a job, I could hire myself to do my job, but is that going to make me satisfied with what I do? Instead, what if I think about, on a day-to-day basis, what are the outcomes I have to have? So today, I have to have an outcome of having my podcast recorded and ready to go for Tuesday. I have to complete a booklet that needs to go to the printer by tomorrow, or actually by this afternoon. Okay. And I have to make 2 referral calls. All right. Once I write that down, I accomplish those outcomes. Then I have a choice. Do I go for a hike with the dog? Do I go run some errands for our household? Do I take a nap? And then maybe I work for another hour in the late afternoon. If I get inspired, I might write some more, do some more content creation, or work on my next keynote presentation. Like, thinking about it in terms of my inputs, not my input. I'm not worried about how many hours I put in. I'm really thinking in terms of, what is my outcome? Because, as my friend Kurt once said, if you think about, it's going to take something 2 hours to do, it's going to take you 2 hours to do it.
Right. Especially for me, if it's going to take me 2 hours to do it, even if it takes me 2 hours to do it, it might have only taken me 30, because I burned the first 90 thinking about it.
Right. Right. Exactly. So if you say it's going to take me 30 minutes, it happens to take you 40, great. But
Right.
if you say 2 hours, it's going to take 2 hours.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's an important concept. And then valuing what you have, you can't help but value what you have when you're thinking in terms of output instead of input.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. And that's, I like that, because there's also, it's just a reminder of, again, set it just, when is that moment, or when is that conversation that starts your story? There's times when, or even like to get to the other side, as we mentioned earlier, some of that is just moving forward with confidence of knowing the value of the story that already exists. So if we're like to say, hey, I want to look at making a second edition, but also following through on the ideas of the calendars and prints from the photos that I took all along the journey. I've mocked up a couple, and they look good, but to me, I'm like, is this good enough? Is this just, and so you get that. It's hilarious to think that I'm some type of perfectionist, because I've never like produced anything perfect. I don't know who the hell I think I am, when I think that I'm you know what I mean? I don't know. If
Right.
I'm like, and anyway, so those things is just deciding and saying that's what I'm doing, and doing it. And then if I fail, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I can't keep talking about saying that's what I'm going to do. Because that's what was kind of supposed to happen this summer after I graduated. I'm like, all right, so after I graduate, I'm going to see if I can monetize my own content that already exists, and do it in a way that also serves a purpose, to where, a percentage of proceeds for everything that I sell will go to either the Team Bella or the Mike Doheny Foundation. And so that way I feel like there's still purpose behind it, other than just making money. And because then donations can still come in, but those go into a donor advised fund, to where no money ever, like 100% of donations get redistributed. Like there's no overhead. And that's how, because some people have said, why don't you just start a nonprofit? And I'm like, I don't want any donor funds ever. You know what I mean? Like
Agreed.
I want all donor money, donated money, to go to here. But if you want to buy something of mine and then allow me to make a profit from it, and then a percentage goes to these, then that's where that profit would come from.
Administrative fees.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. That could cover, allow, for actual income. And so that's like my pitch, I guess, if that's what I want to do. But just so far, we've had an awesome summer, because we've also said that we don't, like, let's just have this summer to do as much as we can. And, we've gone camping multiple times with the kids, and I got to make the trip home. And of course, we had to evacuate the week for the fires that were nearby. And yeah, so needless to say, I have spent zero time yet this summer.
Summer's hard for that.
It is.
So Rob, when you think about Bella, your dog that is kind of the main character in your book, other than you and your brother, when you think about her and you think about the lessons that you learned from her, my first thought is that whole sense of, I guess, that loyalty is what hits me about her, and the way that she changed people, or influenced people, I should say, not changed. But I love the story of her finding that woman, was it along a lake on the East Coast?
Was it the one where the Lady in Black?
Yes.
Is that one? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Bella's influence on her.
Yeah.
What's the influence that you want to have when you think about her influence? Like, I think about words that I want people to use to describe me when I walk away. And the reason I think about that is I've been to enough funerals and memorial services of people describing the person who had died, and not through rose-colored glasses, being honest. But those words, when I hear words like considerate, compassionate, thoughtful, those are the words. And the only way to do that is that if I'm acting and behaving in a way that demonstrates those words. So Bella influenced people to stop for a moment and be present, and to, I don't know. You tell me. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. So now you're talking, this is about me, not about Bella. Like
right.
what I would, okay. Yeah. I know that I know what other people have said when I question my own, like value, I guess.
And legacy. It's legacy.
Yeah.
Living legacy.
Yeah. I don't know what the word to describe this, but I know people have said that, they enjoy being around me during like low times, because like I'm an encourage people. Someone said, like I'm able to find joy in, or at least bring forth joy in some of the darker moments. Because humor, is up there, like having a sense of humor. I'm guessing a lot of people would guess that, but I would hope that people would say that I'm genuine and a good listener. And sometimes it gets tough because I've been a lot of people's unofficial therapist,
Yeah, I can imagine that.
And so I can listen really well, but also, there's times where I can get hyped up and then not be as good a listener as I would like to, because then I interject with my own relatable story and then can go off in like a little tangent that way. And I'll catch myself and I'm like, I'm sorry, this is supposed to be about you. I'm like, I am here to listen. But yeah, I would also like, this is one of the things that I think that's tough. I was once told, do you know how many things that you say that you're going to do and you don't do?
Oh.
And then like that really stuck with me, and it still happens sometimes. And I really don't like the overdiagnosis or self-diagnosis, especially as like spreading through social media like crazy right now, of ADD or ADHD.
And navel gazing.
Yeah. But that's something that has, I think the hardest thing is I'd like to be known as a man of my word. And there are multiple times where it's like, if I said I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. But in my mind, sometimes as long as I do that before I'm dead counts for me.
Well, I think there's an important distinction here. And for our listeners, I'm sure you're going to hear this as well. There's an important distinction between being a man of your word for you and being a man of your word for others. And so many of us have ideas about things we want to do. But the first priority is, if I say I'm going to do something for my kid or my friend or my client, they know it's going to happen. And it's not because I'm such a reliable or responsible person. It's because I said I was going to do it, and this person is important.
Yes.
It's because my relationship with that person matters. My relationship with me absolutely matters, which is why I think it's really important to understand the distinction and be more intentional about what you tell yourself you're going to do.
Right. Yes. Okay. And I'm glad that you brought that up about kids, because for so far, it's so much easier for me to make sure that anything is followed through on for my kids, or even just money that's spent, like, hey, well, there's this thing, or there's this, like preschool, or there's this Montessori, and here's the money difference, and it's like, okay, well, what is the best? Like what's going to be the best for her? Well, for them now, but I'm just thinking of my daughter because she's about to start Montessori school in September. Wow. So I'm excited for that. And I think it's so much easier to make sure I'm following through for things for my kids than it is for things I said I'm going to do for myself.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So I just, for some reason, that set off a flag for me, because I think a lot of us go through that, where people say, oh, well, you said you were going to do. And we have a tendency to hold other people accountable for the things that they say they're going to do, while not holding ourselves accountable for those things.
Oh, right.
And it comes back to that same story about your dad seeing it as do you feel like you failed? Or, how do you see it? This is how I saw it. And being able to distinguish that with somebody you care about, and then not caring if somebody that says something like that, that's like, I don't really care what you think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's weird too, because I go through a big thing of doing things in ways to where some people say like, man, I wish I could just say like dancing, like at a wedding or, or somewhere. I was dancing after a wedding. We went out with friends just this last year. And I overheard this guy being like, man, I wish I could just be that free and not care, because who knows how good of dancing that I'm doing, but I'm just dancing all the night away,
because
like
it's fun,
wet through my shirt complete, you know what I mean? Like just, and yeah, exactly. And it's fun. So there's in certain times where it's like, and I don't care what anybody is thinking about what I look like while I'm dancing, or like I'm having fun and other people are having fun. And as long as you're doing that, as long as you're enjoying yourself and just like feeling the music and like let it move you, that's all that's going on. So, and then even maybe sometimes just being silly in public or something, or, like not caring. Right. But there's other things to where I really care about what other people think or how they view things. And it's weird how it can go from an extreme to another, like completely not caring. And then also like, no, that's not how it went. And then if this is what you feel, then I feel like that is then reality, because if
perception is all that matters.
Yes, right. Exactly. If perception is reality, then I need to change your perception, which.
Do you think you can't? Do you think it has more to do with the first part of not caring about being self-conscious in the context of dancing, let's say, or asking for volunteers on stage, and you're like, pick me, right? And so many people are like hiding, trying not to be selected. Do you think maybe it has something to do with, first of all, at the very beginning of this conversation, you talked basically about being a generalist, trying a whole lot of different jobs, just doing whatever came naturally, whatever opportunity happened to land in your lap, and trying all these different things, kind of set your brain up to be able to do things like that, like getting up on stage or whatever, maybe just for the idea of not wanting to regret not doing it later.
Yeah, that's huge. That's a huge one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that guy, saying, I wish I could be like that. You kind of look at him and go, okay, in a year, are we still going to be having this conversation? Because you just can't get out of your own way.
Right.
And you're going to regret this a year from now. You're going to regret it 2 years from now. You're going to look back and say, why didn't I just dance?
Right.
I regret this. And it seems to me that with all of those experiences you've had, part of your not caring about that self-consciousness is about not wanting to regret because of your experiences that you've already had in loss and grief.
Yeah, I would say that's a huge one. And that's I think one of the things that then makes life harder sometimes is, I had a friend that had lost a brother, and he talked to me and said, it's like, one of the biggest things I learned is you can't live life for two people.
Right.
So there's times where I'm like, I don't think that I'm doing that. But there's other times like say, well, no, I know 100% that I'm doing that. And it's not that I'm trying to live life for my brother, but there's multiple times to where I feel as if everything that I do that is like beyond just like normal, the kind of a monotone 9 to 5-ish just regular, I don't know, any adventure, any, like scuba diving, and my chance to go cycling across Italy, and
right.
all these different things, to where I'm like, every time I do one of those, pays honor to my brother's sacrifice. Every time I live life a little extra, even if every time I spend more time with my children, like taking them to the waterfall hike on a Wednesday, where it's not, the trail isn't full. Like, I feel every one of those is
to honor him.
Yeah. And then, but
it's also to honor you, though. I mean,
right.
I get it. I hear you. The whole, you can't live life for two people. That would be, I've seen people doing things that their loved one would have done. Mm-hmm. And not because they want to do it, but because they're living for this other person. They're living the life of this other person as well as their own.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like, again, an important distinction. The other part of that is the other side of the same coin, which is when you said sometimes you do get really like self-conscious about what other people think. And I wonder if you think about who it is that stops you. Mm-hmm. It's people you love, right? It's people. Of course, if something's going to stop me from doing something I want to do, it's because there may be a negative consequence on my husband or my kid or my client.
Yeah. So then, okay. And then if there's not, then don't worry about it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. I've said this before so many times. I'll say, well, do you care what people think? And half the audience in the keynote will be like, nope. And the other half will be like, well, if I'm honest, right?
Yeah.
And then
right.
I'll say, do you care what certain people think? And then everyone's like, well,
says yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course I care what certain people think.
Right. Yeah. And that can be tough when, there can be a large amount of people that are like, hey, this is amazing. But if there's one person.
Oh, that's so important. So did you get one, as we kind of wrap this up, did you get one that you listened to, one criticism of your book that pops into your head?
Yeah, it's from but it's from someone that I shouldn't. It's like someone flagged me in the comments. You know what I mean? Like a review. Like, did you see this? And I was like, well, I did now. Thanks.
Thanks for letting me know I got this negative review.
Yeah. No, it was a really tough one. And it's kind of funny because some people tried to like dox her a little bit. You know what I mean? Like found like, this is who she is if you want to like talk to her. And I was like, yeah, let's get that, because they posted that like on my own social media. I was like, no, let's not do that. But it just rang in my ear, some of the things, because I felt like if the majority of the reviews for the book were all good, and then some were really great, and just like how you were mentioning it earlier, like I said, it almost brought tears to my eyes when you were talking about holding your brother tighter. But if people have written a negative review about the book, it's about me, like not liking
Isn't
me.
that funny?
Yeah. And I was like, I get
so
that.
Personal.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Because it gets really in there.
I have a question for you though.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So that happened to me as well. And this is the question my coach asked me. I believe in coaching. And so I periodically hire a coach to work with me to make sure I'm giving the best possible service to my clients. Okay. So I had this coach working with me when I published my book. And she said, if you were coaching somebody that happened to, mm-hmm. what would you say? So that's what I'm asking you right now.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be pretty easy. I was like, well, for one, this person doesn't know you. Like that's one of the biggest parts.
Right.
Is you're not even a real person to this person. You are words.
They're seeing you in one dimension.
Yeah.
Right.
And then also remember that that's like the good side and the downside about editing. Sometimes with the editing, you're like, hey, well, this wasn't my whole story, or hey, this part was missing. But then you can also blame it on the editor too. It's like, well, hey, you know what I mean? Like, we're the editors, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, this is what they chose, you know? So yeah, that's what I feel like. And again, this is one of the things that I think that's so hard, is that a negative voice just happens to be the loudest voice in the room. And it doesn't have to be. That's something that we make it to be. Because if you've got, you know, hundreds of positive things, but if that one negative thing sticks out, you know, that's something that you have to work on to just put that aside. But then also, if it really, really bothers you, is there any truth to it? And then if there's any truth to it, is there anything that you can do to, you know, repair that, like within yourself, or work on that?
I'm so glad you said that, Rob. Because to me, that's the critical factor, is if you are really defensive about something that somebody said, there has to be a kernel of truth in there. Mm-hmm. People don't get defensive when they don't see that kernel of truth in it. It's way easier to dismiss something if you don't see the kernel of truth.
Yep.
And it could be tiny, like rice-sized kernel of truth in a, I don't know, a room full of rice. This is a terrible analogy.
No, I get it. No.
Kernel, rice, whatever.
Yeah.
But if there's that one, and I love that idea that, okay, so if there is that edge, you know, there's a slight sliver there. Mm-hmm. What can you do? Can you do anything? And the next question might be, do you want to? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So there's this edge of truth. Maybe that part of my book was a little self-serving, or maybe I could have added some dimension to that part of the book because I like the book. So yeah, there may be this kernel of truth to it. I'm not going to do anything about it because this is where I am now and I'm good with it. Or like you said, I have a second edition coming up. What can I embody about that criticism that can come out in a positive way as a result of all this ruminating about this one negative review? Right. How can I turn this around a little bit? And not just for me, but for the person who wrote the review, because clearly they're the ones that have a problem. If you have 99 positive reviews and one negative review.
Right. And it's interesting too, because in the terms of when people can take the time, because sometimes it's like hard to get people to write reviews, you know, like I was, you know, it's like, oh, hey, yeah, I loved your book. I was like, all right, thanks. And I was bad about asking for them as well. But then I kind of started asking a little bit, like, hey, your book, I loved it so much. It's like, oh, well, could you leave a review or something? You know, like, because I don't want to sound like that's what I want. You know, I want to say thank you so much. And that's it. You know, I don't want to ask people, you know, I don't know. It sounds like it's a salesman type thing when you ask for reviews or something. But anyway, so it's funny to think of that. And then for someone to leave a negative one, thinking of like the time that it takes for them to go and then like get so personal. It's like, oh my God, that hurt. Do I know? Are you sure? Are you using a pseudonym? Like, are we related? Like this, I feel like you know me. Like this sounds so personal. You've got to know me.
You must be the best friend of my ex-girlfriend.
Exactly. You know.
Yes. Well, and I think it's way worse when they leave a 1-star without any explanation.
Right.
That is way worse. So if you really want to hurt an author, listeners, you leave a 1-star without any explanation about why, because that just, you know, and I actually kind of like those because then it looks for real. Like, out of 25 reviews, you got one that was a 0 or 1. So clearly I'm not buying reviews.
Right.
I don't know. Right. Makes it more authentic.
There was one just on that, and we can be done, you know, because you try, like I was going to try to not read any, right? That's why I was like, Marcus told me, he's like, I would recommend you just don't even read any reviews just because, you know, and I was like, but then again, after things kind of go away and after I was like, well, hey, what's going on? Let's just check this out. But also other ones that are tougher when people leave a good review, like a really good review. And then it's like a 1-star is like, maybe they clicked the wrong button. when, and then like, you almost want to reach out, it's
I
like,
got it backward.
yeah, I know. 'Cause you don't want to be like, you don't want to be someone that, I don't know, but it seems like that when you like send an email, hey, I just want to let you know you left this really great review. But it's a 1 star. So it's like dropping the thing, it's about to fall under 5. It was 5 stars. It was great for a while, but now it's like 4.9.
That's when you let your editor do that.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing. That's why I don't want to have anything to do with that. Like, I don't know. That just sounds like stuff that like I said, I don't want to care about that.
Right. There's a humility there.
Yeah.
That is valuable, and it feels authentic. And you said, I want to be known as genuine. I want to be known as somebody who's walking my own walk and doing the right thing. And so I get that. I hear that.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
As we wrap this up,
mm-hmm.
if you could, if you had an audience to share one thing with that the lesson of not just writing a book, but putting yourself out there the way you did, for our listeners, this book is really is personal. It's a memoir, and it's hard to put that out there. So if you were going to say something to the audience who may or may not read your book, what would that be?
And now this thing is like, if they were wanting to share, like if they are wanting to share their own, like what advice would that be?
No, not advice, but what did you go through to do it? What was the meaning behind it for you? Why go through with it?
Yeah. Well, because the first thing, this isn't quite the question you asked, but this is something that popped up that I wanted to say. As far as like fearing, I was interviewed by a young journalism student at WSU for their magazine. And when he was talking about like, I'm afraid to put stuff out there, because he wanted to write more than just his journalism assignments. He had some things that he'd written. He's like, I want to put these out there, but I'm afraid people might not like it. And I said, well, you put it out there, and the people that respond to it and resonate to it, that's who it's for. The people that don't like it, it's not for them. So and sharing it is for you. Because to me, it's weird. It depends on where I am, because I started off, single mom, 4 kids. She never made more than minimum wage, and then just small town, and then military stuff. So to some people, they feel like my stories are more worth listening to than maybe sometimes I'm in the upper middle class and running around. And then people are like, they're only talking about careers and moving forward and being the president or the CFO or whatever. And then,
is it relatable? Right.
But I guess it's almost like I've been told enough times from people that do listen to how I have, kind of dealt with grief, because I also I lost a sister a few years after my brother, and so that was just kind of revisiting that, and I'm mentioning that just because I feel like she doesn't get talked about enough. Charity was her name. She was killed in a car crash on her way to go see our grandma that was in the hospital, and I feel like enough people had asked me for my stories, and that had told me that just stuff that I was writing and putting out there already, just on like Facebook and stuff. They told me that I was putting words to feelings that they had that they couldn't describe, and that was a sense of like therapy to them. So I felt like it was almost like a duty to get some things out and then share them with people, especially with Bella's passing and so many people that were connected to her to try to go through that and put those words out there to see if my own catharsis could help other people.
Mm. That is a perfect way to wrap it up. I mean, it's perfect. Because I think too many people write to tell their story. That's the only reason they're writing. And for our listeners, if the purpose of your writing is to maybe guide others toward dealing with their own grief, or if you've heard from people that your stories have inspired them or motivated them to do something different, or if people have told you that your stories have resonated with them because it feels like your words are coming from their mouth, then you have a reason to write your story, and maybe even fiction, if your stories are connecting with people. I think having a purpose behind your book, why do I want to write this? And if it's your own memoir for your own sake, great. Just know that that's why you're writing it. Be honest with yourself and your readers. Wow. Rob, that was terrific. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you. This has been pretty great. And you've got a nice calming energy. I hope we get to continue to maintain a relationship over the years, because I'm guessing you've got a pretty good following for a reason, and so I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
Well, we have to keep in touch because we're going to keep each other accountable on that second edition of our book.
That's right. And we've got to talk more about Vince.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm going to see him. Speaking of Vince, thanks again for this introduction and for the gift of Rob's book. And I'm going to get to see Vince later this year. I'm so excited. I haven't seen him in over 30 years because we went to high school together.
Oh, wow.
Seen each other since high school.
Nice. Yeah. What an adventurous, that guy could write 10 books.
Seriously. Yeah. I love him. He's such an amazing human.
Me too.
So, yes, we will keep in touch. And for our listeners, we will have links to Band of Brothers information, because Rob mentioned that, and it's an integral part of why he connected so deeply with his co-writer of his book, and links to Rob's Instagram account and Facebook so that you can follow him there, and also so that you can buy the book in the first edition, because the second edition isn't out yet.
That's right.
So don't worry about trying to stop the podcast and pause it and write things down. It will all be in the show notes at elkinsconsulting.com. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Awesome. Thank you. It was my honor.
Listeners, now it's your turn. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is, when you read a book that you really like, leave a review. You can do it on Amazon, on Goodreads, maybe share it, because those of us who have written books know that writing a review really is meaningful. So if you really liked a book, write a review. Even if it was, you kind of liked a book, write a review and leave 3 or 4 stars, but write a review, because that means that people are reading the book, and that matters to us. And then the second thing I'm going to ask you to do is to consider what struggles you've experienced in your life, what grief you've experienced in your life, and how you can frame that story so that somebody else can feel what you're feeling and see what it's like to come out the other side. That's what I'm asking you to do, because your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Thanks for listening.
Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.